Chapter 15 of The House on the Downs by Gladys Edson Locke. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Coil within coil. The lady's maid, in smart hat and tailored suit, created a stir among the members of the jury, all of whom had known her since her childhood. She was entirely self-possessed, and at once tried the effect of her smiles upon the coroner. That official responded to the extent of treating her with a certain amount of deference which her position in life would scarcely have exacted. Cynthia was shown the platinum bracelet and the stained poniard. Without hesitation, she identified them both as Lady Eve's property. "When did you last see them in her ladyship's possession?" The witness paused as though to give emphasis to her words. "I have not seen the bracelet for over 10 days, but I saw the dagger, it was used as a paper cutter, on Lady Eve's desk in her sitting room Thursday noon." "It was not there in the afternoon?" "I couldn't say as to that. It was my afternoon off." "Did you walk on the downs?" "I did not," said Cynthia, more sharply than the occasion seemed to warrant. "I took the bus and went to Lewis to visit an old aunt of mine there." Mark looked at the witness in some surprise. He remembered that Mrs. Peller, Irene Grayle's landlady, had told him that Cynthia had called on the actress-manageress on that Thursday afternoon in question. Why was Cynthia lying? The coroner stroked his chin reflectively. "Can you offer any suggestions as to how Lady Eve Rotherdene's platinum bracelet came to be found on the person of the deceased?" Cynthia's eyes and the lines of her mouth hardened. "I dare say she gave it to him." "She was acquainted with Mr. Rayner, then?" "A bit more than acquainted, I should say." The coroner straightened in his chair. "What do you mean by more than acquainted?" Cynthia's lips curled in a slight sneer. "A lady's maid gets to know things. She had letters and telephones from him." Another wave of interest swept through the court, and necks craned eagerly in Eve's direction. She was staring resentfully at the witness, her color very vivid. Sir Quentin's face was set like a mask. "Of what nature were these communications from the deceased?" the coroner was asking. "I presume you inspected them? Were they what might be termed amatory?" The lady's maid gave a slight, scornful shrug. "They'd gone beyond that stage. Oh, this was an affair of long standing. Craddock Rayner had some hold on Lady Eve. He was pressing her for money, hush money." "On what date did she receive the latest communication from him?" "On Thursday morning Mr. Soames, the butler at the Grange, gave me a letter postmarked Brighton and in Craddock Rayner's handwriting to carry up to Lady Eve." More excitement in the courtroom. Thursday was the day of the murder. The coroner made some careful notes. "What was Lady Eve's demeanor upon receiving this letter?" "She flushed up and ordered me from the room." "Were you able later to inspect this letter?" Cynthia gave a little toss to her head. "I was not. Lady Eve must have destroyed it." The coroner, after a few more questions of no special importance, motioned Cynthia to stand down. Mark was summoned next. His examination was mainly formal and consisted of questions relative to the discovery of Rayner's body. He did no more than corroborate the testimony of Inspector Haskett and Mr. Elphick, and tried, but without success, to evade mention of the moonflower in the dead man's hand. Mrs. Peller, Irene Grayle's landlady at Brighton, followed him in the witness box. The stout, keen-eyed little woman showed herself ready and voluble in regard to the affairs of her deceased lodger, but obstinately reticent when the name of the actress-manageress was introduced. Mrs. Peller informed the court, as she had Mark, that Mr. Rayner was 2 weeks in arrears to her, and that he had been the constant recipient of letters and telephones from women. "He even received a telephone Thursday noon directly after he came back from a morning rehearsal," she volunteered. "It was a woman's voice asked for him, a lady's voice. Soft and low, cultured, you might call it, sir. She had telephoned him several times before. He was always sharp with her, too. Seemed to be trying to hold her to some agreement. Not that I ever tried to listen, but one couldn't help catching a word now and then." "Just so," the coroner acquiesced. "Now, about this telephone on Thursday noon. Did you, happen to overhear any of the conversation?" The witness flushed slightly. "Well, I did, sir," she admitted. "Just before Mr. Rayner rang off, I heard him say, 3:30 then, and without fail. I can make it in my car." "Did you happen to ring up the Central Exchange to find out where the call came from?" Mrs. Peller looked disappointed with herself. I never thought of it. A subdued ripple of amusement ran through the court. The witness settled herself stiffly in her chair. The coroner very gently went on to question her about the letters the dead actor was in the habit of receiving. Mrs. Peller, her brief resentment overcome by her desire to prove herself an invaluable witness, dwelt in detail upon the letters that had come to Rayner in a woman's handwriting, bearing a crest on the envelope and the postmark of Rotherdene village. You never discovered the name of this correspondent? No, I never did. Mrs. Peller spoke with evident regret. The coroner next questioned her regarding any visitors Craddock Rayner had recently had. The landlady was communicative on this subject also, and told how Cynthia Melsom had called upon him a week before the murder, and quarreled bitterly with him in the sitting-room. She had not been able to hear what it was all about. She didn't give me her rightful name, said Mrs. Peller in an aggrieved tone, and I didn't know who she was till I saw her in the witness box. Mark was glad that the landlady did not tell of Cynthia's later visits to Irene Grayle on the afternoon of the murder and again on the day he had called at the theatrical lodging-house. He wished Irene's name kept out of the affair as far as possible. The coroner, however, soon introduced it. He asked if the relations between the actress-manageress and Rayner had continued friendly up to the day of the latter's death. Mrs. Peller became wary. Rather more than friendly, sir. Their engagement was announced only Wednesday night, the night before he was murdered. There didn't seem to be any cloud between them up to Thursday noon, when I understand you last saw the deceased? Mrs. Peller sniffed cynically. Not time enough for that. He was clever. She'd no inkling of affairs with other women. I never discuss one lodger with another, so she didn't know what I knew. I understand, said the coroner blandly, that Miss Grayle was out on Thursday afternoon. What of it? Demanded the witness tartly. Most of my lodgers were out then. Theatrical folk must get the air when they can. The coroner nodded. Did Miss Grayle happen to tell you where she was going? She did not. I don't play chaperone to my lodgers. They go and come as they like. The coroner was persistent. Did Miss Grayle seem excited and overwrought when she went out? Not that I noticed. There was no reason why she should be. The coroner let this pass. What time did Miss Grayle return? Oh, sometime between 5 and 6. I didn't look at the clock. She was very much overwrought then? The coroner insinuated gently. Mrs. Peller's lips tightened. She was sick, she answered shortly, so sick she couldn't act that evening. The coroner stroked his chin. Ah, yes, and what was the nature of her sickness? Collapse, snapped Mrs. Peller. Nerves, if you will have it. But that doesn't prove, she added belligerently, that she knew a thing about Rayner's murder. She'd been working hard at the theater, and had a deal of responsibility on her shoulders. She just broke down under it, that's all. The coroner made a gesture of dismissal. You may stand down, Mrs. Peller. Not altogether to Mark's surprise, Cynthia Melsom was recalled. The lady's maid had not lost a whit of her composure, but the coroner's manner toward her had hardened, and his tone was peremptory as he bade her explain why she had not stated that she was acquainted with Craddock Rayner and had called upon him at his lodgings. Cynthia smiled with cool insolence. I understood that I was supposed simply to answer questions, not to volunteer information. The coroner's mouth set severely. How long have you known the deceased? Cynthia shrugged indifferently. Oh, I met him a few years ago. I was on the stage myself then, playing extras in a barnstorming company. Rayner was a juvenile lead. He borrowed a bit of money I had contrived to save up, and then skipped to parts unknown. I couldn't find out what had become of him until a few days ago. I saw his picture in a Brighton paper. He'd grown older, of course, but I recognized him. I went over to Brighton, found out where he lodged, and asked him for the money he had owed me for so long. He denied at first that he had ever borrowed it, and we did have a few words, but he finally agreed to pay me 2 weeks from then. That would be this coming Wednesday, and we parted civilly. The coroner looked fixedly at the witness. You say you recognized the deceased by his picture? Did you not recognize him by his name as well? A shade of surprise crossed Cynthia's face. She hesitated and glanced around the court before meeting the coroner's eyes. He had changed his name, she finally admitted. The coroner straightened with satisfaction. And what was his name when you knew him? Cynthia appeared slightly annoyed. He called himself Barnard Darrell then. I don't know if it was his real name. The coroner continued to survey her sharply. You must have been very, friendly with the deceased at that time to loan him your savings. The lady's maid gave a smile, signifying contempt for his insinuation. Not at all, she answered coldly. It was purely a matter of business. He promised me a high rate of interest. I was young and gullible, and he did me in. When did you last see the deceased? The coroner inquired suavely. The witness arched her eyebrows in a glance of surprise. Why, that day I called on him at Brighton, 2 weeks ago, this next Wednesday. This concluded her testimony. The next witness was a middle-aged taxi-man, a big, hulking fellow in a tightly buttoned uniform that seemed several sizes too small for him. His red, blotchy face and bleared eyes suggested an intimate acquaintance with fourpenny ale. He was sworn in under the name of Tom Spurge. Mark found his evidence of an unpleasant and disquieting trend. It concerned Irene and the fact that on the afternoon of Rayner's death, at 2:45, the actress-manageress had hailed the cabman at the corner of King's Road and West Street and directed him to drive her as quickly as possible to Rotherdene Village. The coroner held up his hand. Just a minute, Spurge. You are absolutely certain your fare was Miss Irene Grayle of the Theatre Royal? The taximan glared in beery truculence. I'd ought to be, governor. Ain't I drove her every night from the theatre to Mrs. Peller's? The coroner asked no further question on this score. Did Miss Grayle appear excited and overwrought on Thursday afternoon? Spurge mopped his perspiring forehead with a vivid and not too clean handkerchief. I ain't meanin' no harm to the lady, governor. She was always a generous fare, but she did seem a bit upset, and in a vast hurry, too. What time did you reach Rotherdene Village? Didn't reach it at all, governor. When we got about a mile distant from it, Miss Grayle told me to let her out. She were going to walk the rest of the way over the downs. Queer taste, I thought it, to go tramping over hills in the hot sun, but I hadn't no cause for complaint. She gave me a quid and told me not to wait. She'd come back by bus. Now just where did you leave Miss Grayle, Spurge? I've told you, governor. A mile or so out of the village. The coroner was insistent. Near Rotherdene Hollow? The watery eyes of the cabman protruded painfully. His breathing was noisily audible. I ain't going to get the lady into trouble, governor. She gave me a quid. You'll get yourself into trouble, my man, if you don't speak up, warned the coroner harshly. Remember, you are under oath to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Now, did you leave Miss Grayle near Rotherdene Hollow? Spurge respired like a horse. It warn't far from there, he acknowledged sullenly. What time was this? Matter of 20 minutes to 3:45. The coroner sat back in his chair, content. He had made his point. Irene Grayle had been in the vicinity of Rotherdene Hollow about 4:15, and according to medical testimony, the murder of Craddock Rayner had occurred at approximately 4:30. Stand down, Spurge, he bade in quiet, even tones. The cabman obeyed and lurched back to his seat, leaving in his wake a savory odor of fourpenny ale. End of chapter 15.